white pine, and you're going to put that on a piece of paper and you're going to present that to whoever you're working for. And you want to be confident that that is the species that you named, right? And it's not good enough, really, to be able to say, which people do all the time when they're asked, how do you know it's a white pine? And they say, well, I know. And that doesn't help us at all, right, in terms of learning. So it's the characteristics that we want to be able to know about, retain, and then search. And it's not one characteristic, it's many. And that's where the scientific method comes in. So I'm going to say that's a white pine because I know it. But I'm not 100% sure. I don't have my glasses on. I'll use that as an excuse. I can see this fuzzy green tree, so it's an evergreen, so that would make it a little more confident that it's a white pine. I look up into the crown and canopy, and I see these shoots sticking out that are little tiny long tufts that I know is a sort of indicator of white pine. I look at the branches of white pine, and I know that the branches arch up, and they create sort of what I refer to as hands out there, just standing out there in the open field, because we know white pine is a sort of pioneer old field tree, right? It grows out and it stands up like that. So I'm getting up to about 80% confident it's a white pine. And then I'm going to go up much closer, excuse me, and I'm going to look at the needles, and I'm going to see that, oh yeah, there are needles attached to the twig in bundles. I'm going to count the bundles of 5. And that, as I went through that process, was what I came to look for. So I created a hypothesis in my head that if that tree has needles in a bundles of 5, then I'm going to be 100% sure it's a white pine. And there you go. I'm really sure this is a white pine because it's got needles in bundles of 5. Now, I could start there and be 100% sure, but I need to know those characteristics. And with species that we don't know that well, some of the characteristics overlap a lot. And so we need to look for additional characteristics to elevate our confidence in identification. And if you just get into that habit, you can say it's a white pine, but look for characteristics that makes it for sure. And if it's not that you're sure, if you're not really sure, put a question mark on it or make a note. Identify something unique about that individual that might lead to identification when you go look up that characteristic. And then you can be more confident. And the more you do it, obviously, the more you have confidence, and you can just walk through a woods and identify plants and get an inventory of what's there. And why is that relevant? Well, because as we started our conversations with in the last few weeks, being able to name something allows us to share information and knowledge. And then based on that, take action, whether it's conservation value, forestry and wood products extraction, or ecological wildlife habitat and creating and seeing what habitat is there. It's all based on naming species. So in the group of pines, genus Pinus, beauty about the taxonomic system for the genera, you just got to learn one name when you're in a group. Pinus strobus, white pine. And it's a 5-needle pine, so you know, I remember I talked about the white pines standing like this. And in the springtime, white pines, they start their growth. Conifers in general have growth that is determinate, and it has apical dominance, it's called. So the top leader is going to grow first. That's what keeps the conical shape of most conifers. There's a dominant terminal bud that's going to grow first. Then the laterals grow. So this white pine, WHITE, is standing out there with that leader sticking up. And in the springtime, it's strobing that message to everybody, to all its colleagues, because it actually takes over. It kind of gives them the finger. And that's how I remember all the characteristics of white pine. And so when we look, you can look out there, way out there, you can see that next to that house to the left, that tree that's got a little silhouette next to it's to the left of the hardwood, which is to the left of the house. That's a white pine. It's standing there, and I know it because of its shape from this distance. White pine, Pinus strobus. Any thoughts on white pine? Pressure treated wood definitely do not burn. But when we talked about wood anatomy, we talked about a lot of things. So right away, what's a matching word for this piece of wood?
Pith.
Huh?
Pith. Like, you want me to describe what's in it?
No, just one matching word that you see when you see this.
Where? Rings.
Rings. Perfect. Another matching word.
Xylem.
Xylem. Perfect. What else?
Pith?
Pith. Yes. Rings. Xylem. Any other matching words that one might think of right off the bat? Gross anatomy of wood.
Phloem.
Phloem.
Can't see it, but it's there, maybe.
You know, if we go right to the pith, and we know that when a tree forms that there's both phloem and xylem cells. The xylem cells are compressed and then well gone, but yes, I'll give that to you. You're right. But where is phloem, active phloem, that's not here? Right? Where is the active phloem on a tree? Right under the bark, right? So there's no active phloem on this chunk of wood. This is the xylem. All this is dead cells, particularly now that it's cut down. But water is going to move up to the canopy through the xylem, right? And down and up through the phloem. Annual rings. Megan showed me a nice piece of mountain alder with really, really tight annual rings. What else, as we talk about the rings, do you see in these pieces of wood? Vocabulary words, that is. Matching words. Early wood and late wood, right? So the early wood is happening right, not now, we're still dormant, right? But in another month, the early wood's going to start to form. The sap's going to start to flow. And we're going to get maple syrup. And it's going to flow up through the xylem. Buds are going to start to develop. They're going to be big vessel elements in hardwoods so that water can flow. And it's starting to grow right through the xylem. That new vascular cambium right underneath the bark is forming new wood. Flowing. Not a lot, but a little bit. And then those are big vessels so they can move sap. And then into the spring, as the spring develops and the leaves come out, you got a lot of growth if the resources are good. And then by midsummer, the tree is already starting to shut down. The leaves last into the fall, right? But it's already starting to shut down, and so wood's still being produced. That's the late wood. tighter density of vessels and cells, tracheids, thicker cell walls so the openings are smaller. They don't need as much sap because it's shutting down. And so you end up with the annual rings that we see and able to age the tree at least in temperate zones or drought-prone areas where there's an actual hard cessation of growth due to winter. Is it due to cold? Well, yeah, it makes sense it's due to cold, but it's actually really due to the sort of stopping of the whole ability of the leaves to produce and moisture and all combination of factors that puts a tree into dormancy and you get annual rain. As theory that moves sap that we talked about. You can't answer this question, sir. Cohesion, tension theory, right? The hydrologic pump. So the properties of water, polar molecule, they pull on each other. Capillary action, they hold on to the sides of the walls of the cells, which are super small. So water can rise a meter without any kind of other forces on it against gravity. And then with the pressure from the roots and the demand of the tree buds, up the water goes. And I'm all ready to tap trees. We're ready to go. All right. Let's go over there. Are two different species of conifers. Obviously, you can see that there's a difference, right? So the one on the left compared to the two on the right, or more. What's the
Art color.
Art color. All right. So that helps us right away think about two different species. And we look at this whole bank and think about this whole area for a lot of conifers. It's a little more close about the soil.
Sandy.
Not necessarily acidic, but sandy for sure, right? Lower nutrient quality pines have a really wonderful ability to compete where there's a little bit droughty sandy soil, lower nutrients. And that's what it is. It's not that plants don't like a certain condition. They have the ability to compete better than other species on that site. So if I say they like it, throw some snow in my face and correct me, okay? But to the left is what species? I heard pine.
White pine?
Yeah, white pine. How do you know?
It's all the things you just said.
Ah. All right, so then what's
That's
the
good.
one on the right? Red pine. Why do you say red pine with such confidence? Or pitch pine.
Well, the scale of the bark looks different than pitch pine. I feel like it's not as...
Okay, so you're eliminating characters, right? That's good, instead of knowing what the characteristics you want to be looking for.
I have to say, can I count the needles?
So go ahead and go count the needles. Let's see what we get. There should be two. Yeah, two?
Oh, here's a low one.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
2 needles. Excellent. Okay.
There you go, Colin.
Let's see. Okay, so no one has named the correct species yet. Let me give you that.
Scotch pine, but is it frilly?
Scotch pine. Did you say Scotch pine? Awesome. Why
Nice
do you,
call.
Why do you say it's Scotch pine?
Well, it's not just fine because it's free, and I'm remembering vaguely, like, it looks like that.
All right, excellent. So this is Scotch pine, and I really appreciate you saying red pine. To start with, this is the color of the bark, but the color of the bark is also one of those characteristics that is a dead giveaway for Scotch pine. And mnemonics sometimes can be a little offensive to certain people. I recognize that. But the intent is try to remember things. So I've got a friend, Kenny Ferguson is the name, and he's Scottish. And every, I think it's actually tonight, or this weekend, is the Burns Supper. Does anybody know Burns and the Scots? He's a famous poet, and every year they eat some really nasty stuff called haggis. Anybody know about haggis? Right? And they drink whiskey, Scotch, and I think the whiskey is supposed to kill the taste of the haggis, but some people like it. And so anyway, we would gather every year, and Kenny, Scotsman, drink whiskey. His face would get really orange, and he'd be drinking these 2 malt whiskeys. So when I think of Scotch pine, I think of 2 malt whiskey, drunk Scotsman, 2 needle pine, and that's how I remember Scotch pine. Yes.
So if there's a white pine and a Scots pine right next to each other, how can we tell which one's red and which one's Scots?
Red and Scotch?
Yeah. Because all the characteristics you pointed out are like, that's how I know it's a red pine. And so if they were next to each other, I don't know how I could...
Red pine does not have orange bark like this, and
Okay.
its bark color is uniform all the way up and down the stem.
Okay.
You can see down here it's a lot darker, and then it starts to break up.
Okay.
That's because the outer bark is shedding and falling off. Red pine keeps its bark and stays red
Okay.
compared to that. And you come up close, it's a double malt, 2 malt Scotch whiskey pine compared to the 3-needled red pine.
Okay.
Aren't they usually like a little rounded or curved?
The needles themselves? Yeah, the needles are got that
It's like
little twist to it. Yeah. You got to get up close. Check it out. 2-needle pine. And so what's the Latin of Scotch pine? Pinus Scottish? Huh?
I want to say strobus, but I don't think that's right.
Strobus is white pine. White pine. Strobing out there. In your manual, which got all this great information in it, you'll find all that information. And Scotch pine is way down there, 3/4 of the way down. It says pine Scotch, Pinus sylvestris. Now, how are we going to remember that?
Oh, is it like Sylvester? Did Burns write, what's that song that you sing on New Year's?
Yeah.
What do you mean, yeah? Did he write it? Do you know what I mean? What's the question? I like he read, didn't he write?
Talking about Auld Lang Syne?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Didn't he write that?
I believe so.
I'm pretty sure, and that is like a New Year's song, and Sylvester is another way to say New Year's.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's pretty
At least
good.
for a lot of people.
That's a new one.
That's good.
Pinus sylvestris.
No Sylvester the Scotch.
Yeah. Sweet. Pinus sylvestris.
Another thing to note too with the Scott pine, typically the sucker can't grow straight to save its life. So if you look at the trunks, they usually got some bend to them.
The trunks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now we can look through here. We can see we've got white pines mixed in with Scotch pine, right? Let's go up here and see if we can find a red pine.
Say they're cute.
Okay, so you're correct. This is pitch pine. Now we can say we know it's not white pine because if we bring that close, we see that it's a 3-needle pine, not 5. It doesn't have the orange stem like Pinus sylvestris. And it's kind of hairy, fuzzy, I would say. That is, there's tufts of needles coming out of the branches. And only pitch pine will do that because pitch pine is a fire-evolved species, fire-dependent species, shall we say. And its ability to sprout and put out branches after a fire is what allows it to persist and survive those fire areas like the Albany pine berries or pitch cod, right? There's a lot of pitch pine in there. Coastal environments, mountaintops, where fire started by lightning might create that type of environment on a regular basis, so many decades when something like that happens. And so it has epicormic branches which are arise from epicormic buds, which are buds, dormant buds that sit underneath the bark when a disturbance happens or a fire. Those sprout, develop, and they put out new branches. Hardwoods have a lot of epicormic buds. That's why we see when a tree falls over or gets cut down, it sprouts. Those dormant buds underneath the bark allows that to happen. You do that to a white pine and that doesn't happen. Or a Scotch pine. But pitch pine will, because it's got those epicormic buds, because it's dependent on fire. So it's a 3-needle pine, pitch pine, fire dependent, and how do we remember that?
3 strikes and you're out.
3 strikes and you're out. You remember, you're awesome. So, I think of baseball getting a pitch, and 3 strikes and you're out. So there it is, pitch pine. Yes?
You also said that red pine has 3 needles.
Red pine does have 3 needles.
It does? Okay.
2 or 3. A little barrier. No, the pine tree, the big one.
This one.
Yeah, this one.
No.
Why not?
Splitting. It's a stage, not back, but.
Yeah, struck by lightning.
Yeah.
It's got a nice crack in it. You come over here and look at this crack. I'm going to use the crack to go back to the development of wood and wood anatomy. And when wood fibers get laid down, they don't get laid down in a vertical. Although we talked about them being stacked on top of each other, they actually get laid down at a slight angle. And they end up, as they grow, sort of spiraling around the tree. And so when a tree gets injured, either in the roots or up in the canopy, the injury can affect the entire tree because the spiral goes around like that is spiraling around the tree. It's the same thing on the opposite effect. It does that because you look at the roots, and the roots over here don't just feed this side of the tree. It feeds the entire tree because of that spiral. And that's really important for the tree to sort of survive because if part of the roots get damaged, it can still grow and climb. So like a tree can fall over with half of its roots sticking up in the air, but the other roots that are in the ground can still keep it alive. It's kind of a safety mechanism that's worked into the tree. Okay, so we got 3 species up here: white pine, Pinus strobus, Scotch pine, Pinus sylvestris, and pitch pine, Pinus rigida. Let's go to the road. There you go, yeah, exactly. Well, my impression is that all the needles are whorled at the ends of the twigs, and they're really long needles. So those characteristics in itself is like, oh, it's got to be red pine. The branches are tufts like bottle brushes. Test tube cleaning bottle brushes, those kind of things. And so I'm gonna look to see if the bark is a uniform color all the way up and not orange sticking out anywhere. And indeed, as I get closer and I examine the entire trunk, it's got a red tinge to it, and I'm not seeing any orange blotches like where bark is falling off and exposing the inner bark, like in Scotch pine. And finally, I would go count the needles, although I know it could be 2 or 3, but at least I would be able to determine it's not white pine. Red pine only grows around here where it's planted, and in higher elevation sites like Black Mountain. If you've been to Black Mountain over in Dummerston, that's natural red pine. So you're not going to see it in the woods much in a natural forest. And so it's a nice big hedgerow, and it's Pinus resinosa. Red pine's got some a lot of resin that can come out of it. And there it is.
It's a beauty.
It's a beauty.
Mm-hmm.
A true bog. A little precarious because if they blow out this thing, you could lose the whole bog. And we come here to look at a specific 2 different species that we expect to find. That is black spruce and that they have a very predictable set of species that grade from the uplands down to the lowlands. And this is where, if you look in your manual and you see the wetland status, different categories of wetland status, these species are wetland species. Facultative wetland species it's called. And so when you're looking at different spruce trees, is it red or black? Well, you got to look at also habitat as a characteristic in the line of characteristics that we're thinking of. And what we see here is upland species, white pine, red pine. Then it gets closer to the bog, we get the larch, and then in the bog we get black spruce. And of course the shrubs we see in here are also predictable like that, with high bush blueberry. Then as we go into the bog, we'll see floral, maybe leatherleaf, other real wetland species. Let's walk into the bog a little bit. And not to do that when it's not frozen, because you don't want to damage it, but when it's frozen, you have an opportunity.
Does it freeze all the way? Is it still shallow?
Okay, so welcome to the airport bog. We're standing in the center of it, which, as I said, you don't do in the summertime because you can damage it and you get stuck. But bogs, this is an old kettle hole, glacial formed, so a piece of ice broke off, and it sat here, was covered by outwash. This was an old glacial lake, and probably the coldest place in the region right now is right here. Doesn't feel that bad. And so it was covered with outwash, that piece of ice, and then when the ice melted away, it left a depression. It was compacted enough to hold water, and then over the last 10,000 years, vegetation came in, decomposed slowly, it developed peat, and you end up with a bog, very acidic, and that's the conditions in which these species that we're seeing here can tolerate and grow. And there is open water in this bog in a few places, but this is a very later successional bog. As you can see, the black spruce is really filling in, and it's filled in the last 20 years that I've been coming here quite a bit. And so eventually it's going to just become all filled in unless some disturbance comes, and that's part of succession, right? And it adds to diversity within the landscape. Now, you can see as we walk through these trees that don't have leaves. From the outside, you'd think that this is a hardwood deciduous, but it's not. It is our only deciduous conifer, which is larch, or tamarack it's called. And the needles grow on these very short tufts, real short shoots, and they pop out in the springtime, and they're gorgeous in terms of the color and their feel. They're like green velvet leaves, needles, and really, really soft. And then in the fall, when they shed their needles, the needles turn bright yellow. And it is a species that really is an indicator of moisture, bogs, and then you'll see them on the sides of hills, like driving up through Vermont. There's a few spots in these valleys in the fall where there's these line of larch that sort of come down, cascade down the slope, and you know that there's a seep or a stream, what's it called? Help me out here. Oh my
A
God.
fen?
Not a seep, a
Drainage furrow?
Spring. Spring. Yeah, so a natural spring. So there's moisture, and a good indicator is that line of larch. Really pretty. Still filming the airplane?
Everyone wave. Safe
Jack,
travels.
you have a question?
Yeah, what's the Latin for larch?
Larch. Larix. Larcinia. If I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yes.
Lar.
So you're only going to find this in bogs or on the sides of slopes where it's wet. Larix larcinia. And then we have the other conifer is black spruce. Black spruce, really able to tolerate acidic, moist sites and mountaintops in the Northeast. And the difference between black and red spruce habitat is the key one. But then the needles of black spruce tend to be shorter and not as deep red. They're not as they're not as long. They're not as deep red or deep green as the red spruce. And if you look at the twigs and you compared them, the black spruce would be sort of darker in its features, and that's a really bad soft characteristic, but that's what it is.
And they're not flat.
What's that?
The needles aren't flat.
The needles aren't flat. Most spruce needles are not flat. You cut them in cross section. They're
I say square, but that's
sort of square, sort of flattened diamond, maybe. Yeah.
that's a better term.
Yeah. In the alternate versus opposite, that opposite branch can fall off and it can look like alternate, but you got to look at the whole thing. And so you will see white pine with needles where the bundle is less than 5 is because the needle has fallen out, not because it wasn't there. So, and as Megan said, it makes sense that you'll see white pine here because succession is occurring, and the plants are building up soil to a point where there's enough. It's not totally saturated in water where it can germinate and grow, but it's not going to grow to be a big tree because its roots are going to go down. They're going to be too wet, so they got to stay up top to get oxygen and to grow. And it just won't get to be a big tree in this stage of succession yet because of the moisture. And a lot of these trees, you tip up, the roots are going to be spread out on top of the peak bog, not going down deep like the pines up on the sandy uplands. They have to have roots that go down deep to get moisture. The root structure of these is more plate-like than the pines would be. And so we have a twig of an evergreen black spruce, and then a twig of a gymnosperm, call it a conifer, deciduous. I'm looking at these right here, they're all the same species, and do they look the same or of any of the species we've talked about so far, which is white pine, pine strobus, pitch pine, Pinus rigida, red pine, Pinus resinosa, and carcum. Scotch pine, Pinus sylvester, black spruce, Picea. We didn't identify the name of black spruce, did we?
Mariana.
We didn't say it over there.
We did not say
We
it,
did not,
no.
yeah.
No.
Picea mariana.
Marinara.
Marinara, no, can't do that. Marine as in wet, right? Marine, Mariana. And then Larix, Laricinia, tamarack. So there's 5 species. So do those trees right there look anything like those?
It looks like the black spruce, but not.
No. But not. So look at the branches and tell me all the same, so you can kind of spread out a little bit. And tell me what you notice about the needles in the context of the needles of pinus, which are in bundles attached to the twig.
They're all like
All right, so they're
360 kind of.
they're kind of around the twig. What else do you notice?
Oh no, they are flat.
They're sort of flat. Okay. What else?
Single, like they're not in bundles really. They're just like a single.
They're not in bundles at all, so they're not in the genus Pinus. We can just start there, right? And it doesn't look like a spruce, does it? It doesn't look like the black spruce at all? Are they pointy and pokey like spruce or something different? Dull and rounded, yes, excellent. So what conifer has these characteristics? What genus, shall I say? Not spruce, not pine, not larix.
Hemlock.
There's hemlock. What else is there? That's suga.
There's cedar, but this isn't cedar.
There's cedar. Say
Just sounds like I'm grunting. Fir.
fir. Yes. Sorry.
Babies.
We definitely have to push our voice out there. So this is a fir. It's not a hemlock because hemlocks are shorter needles, and if we turn them over, they've got the stomates that we can see on them. And hemlock branches are kind of flat and planar,
Yeah.
and they alternate in their growth pattern. This is a fir, in its name at least. And it's not native to New England. It's in fact a false fir. I'm trying to give it away here. Oh, there she goes. Excellent. So she's remembering the Latin pseudotsuga, which is false hemlock, really, right? But it's a false fir from the West Coast that dominates all up and down the West Coast. Huge genetic variation. And so what's the common name? Pseudotsuga menziesii is the Latin. I'm looking for Douglas fir's cones. Because this is Douglas fir, Pseudotsuga. It's kind of old, but Douglas fir cones have the bracts that hold the seed actually stick out of the seed sticks out of the bracts. That's a much better one. Yeah, so it's a really drop it. It's a really
that's beautiful.
it's a really fuzzy cone, very unique. None of the eastern species have this characteristic. So if you can find the cones, you know it's Douglas fir. It reminds me as if it looked like there were a whole bunch of mice that crawled into the bracts of this cone and they slammed it down, and so there's the poor mouse buried in this cone with his tail and his 2 feet sticking out the back. Anyway, Douglas fir cones, Pseudotsuga menziesii. It is a huge dominant species on the West Coast, and its genotype, again going back to the readings, its genetic variation is really great up and down the coast, and so you will have Douglas fir, same species, that can interbreed, but the characteristics and the growth rate of a species up in Alaska, or a variety up in Alaska, to one down in Northern California is very different. So if you took seeds from the entire range of Douglas fir, and you planted them next to each other, in one spot, they would grow at different rates depending on the conditions that are there. And so they've evolved, those are the same species, to have different genotypes that reflect the phenotype, which is the characteristic that we see based on the environment. Douglas fir, it's planted here like a lot of species because this area right here that we're going to walk in was back in the 30s and 40s a cleared field, agricultural field, and they planted a whole bunch of conifers here. It was the Keene Forestry Park. And here we have Douglas fir. Now, true firs, Hannah said the tip was sort of rounded and blunt. True firs actually have a notch in the end of it. And this does not. So when we look at balsam fir, we should see a little notch in the end of the twig. And we'll try to find it over here. Douglas fir. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think they evolved to stick their feet out of the cone to like promote birds and squirrels eating it for seed dispersal? Or do you think they just do it?
That's a good hypothesis why that evolved that way, and I really don't know the answer. I don't know. But certainly the bracts protect the seed that has the wings on it, and those wings are evolved for seed dispersal. And so this is a different type of wing that evolved, and so maybe the dispersal pressures was what created that characteristic. But I'm not sure about that for Douglas fir. Okay, let's go to this here because I hadn't noticed it before, but and I was straining to get the shape of the leaves. Are those lobes rounded or pointy?
Nice and
It
round.
looks pointed higher. But
But it's still inside the sky, right?
Yeah, Colin, this is for you, buddy. This is one of the oak species, and the rounded lobes. The characteristic of the bark tells me it's white oak,
Or white oak? Oh.
which is pretty interesting because white oak tends to be a species that likes warmer areas, southern slopes in this particular region. But it's cool, it's right here. And they're very plainer and soft and kind of graceful in its shape, I would say. It's the northern white cedar. Single type of scale. Soft, overlapping, not like the juniper, the red cedar. And so, more like that arborvitae. Take a look at that particular species, so you got a good search image of the characteristics of this individual. I'm going to take a sample. That's a western species. So this is the concolor fir. It can look like a balsam fir, but it's not. It's one of those weird things that got planted here, and there's only a few of them that are persisting. And this one over here is a balsam fir. We're going to see other balsams over there. The balsam fir has a little notch at the end of the needle. This is not. But it is a fir. But it's unique. It's just kind of cool because you don't see it anywhere else except you go west. You see how long those needles are? That's totally different. Sasquatch! So here's the concolor fir. There's a balsam fir there.
Battery.
And let's keep going. We'll see them again. But this whole line of trees is based on the bark. I'm looking at red pine. I'm looking at Norway spruce. Right behind Jack, those two big trees are red pine. Uniform bark going all the way up, not changing color, no orange at all. Sort of orange vegetation, the orange needles. And then you can see way up top there, there's sort of like blue needles, very different shapes. So obviously we're looking at white pine there. These here, different morpho types, different characteristics. I'm not going to name it. And then the one in the back, different characteristics. So we got 3 different species going on here, maybe 4. And we're going to fight our way in through the twigs. Watch out for your eyes as we go through here. We're going to try to get through these trees. You can see that the bark of this particular tree is very different as a characteristic. It's very vertical and shreddy. This is a characteristic of cedar bark. And around here we have 2 cedars, well 3, but the one on the coast is not here, which is Atlantic white cedar. What we have is white cedar here and red cedar. Okay? And the bark kind of looks the same to both. The white cedar is like the ornamental called arborvitae, if anybody knows that, which is a very soft needle conifer. It's not pokey and pricky like the red cedar. So there's a difference between the two right away. Is red cedar has pricky needles, and the white cedar has softer needles. And they're not actually needles, they're scales that overlap each other. We're going to move around here to try to find them. We can't really grab them up here. And the red cedar, which, damn if I can't see the red cedar, which I believe this is, is not a cedar at all. It's a juniper. And that's why it has pokey needles. Cedars have softer needles. And they both have similar looking bark, though the white cedar seems to be lighter and whiter. But the red cedar has these needles that have 2. There's actually soft ones, and then there's the pokey one. And that's the Juniperus virginiana red cedar. There's more on the other side that I think we'll be able to get the needles. And then we'll look for the Atlantic white, or the white cedar also. If you come across it and it's like, all right, that's a cedar, but which one is it? You got to go look at the needles. These are reddish, and they're not flat and kind of graceful and elegant. They're kind of rough and scraggly, which is the juniper. Juniperus virginiana. We'll come back to that. Now, this one, you can see, is also different. If you flip it up, you see the white? So that's the Tsuga canadensis. Eastern hemlock. Eastern hemlock grows in valleys, likes riparian areas, but can grow in uplands too. Hemlock woolly adelgid is the insect that's kind of wiping them out. from the south working its way up to the north. Sort of in this area, but not in great numbers yet. So we're still fortunate to have hemlock. Short needles. The branching is alternate, which is different than the balsam fir, which is very much opposite. And the shape of the canadensis, nice big fluffy canopy, wide with the top that droops over. Unlike the balsam fir, which sticks up straight like a church spire. Opposite branching, very conical. The hemlock is a nice big tree that you kind of want to hug because the needles are soft. And if you're a giant, you know, I'd hug a hemlock before I'd hug a spruce or a balsam fir. All right, let's move, see what else we can find. Oh, look at that. What's this? Ow, it's pokey. Single needles attached to the twig. Very pokey. Spiky. Say loudly. What is it? Loudly? Spruce. Did you say spruce? Yeah, it is. It's a spruce. It's a spiky spruce. Are we in a bog? Then it's probably a red spruce. But are we in an area where ornamental Norway spruce is planted? So it could be a Norway spruce too. So Norway or red is what this is. I'm 100% sure it's either Norway or red. And there's a lot of Norway around here. So it's so hard to tell them apart. But when I look at the red spruce, which I've studied a lot up in the White Mountains, the needle, the stem of the the twig of the Norway spruce isn't as pale, light brown as what I'm seeing here. And so I turn them over and I look at the backside, and I look at that color of the branch, and I'm going to identify this one as a Norway spruce, simply because of the environment which it's in and the planting. And canopies of Norway spruce, obviously it's not native, it is from Norway. The twigs are of bigger trees droop down. So you can look at the shape of a Norway spruce tree and you can see that all the branches, not the big ones, but the side branches are just kind of folded down. Very good characteristic of that. And it's like when Connor, I asked him originally, that's what he pointed to the Douglas fir, the branches pointing down, and thought it could be Norway, which is exactly
I was
right.
a fool.
But Douglas fir does that a little bit too. Not as much as Norway. All right, let's. This one right here. It's a really long needle for a fir. That's the Navy concolor fir. Very different, right? Wouldn't expect to see that here in the woods, but there it is.
Super cool. Sorry. I got excited. Concolor fir. Where are you?
Type needle. Tufted at the end, really long. Keep moving to the right, see that crooked Scotch pine. And then if you go further to the right, you see those branches up there that are sort of droopy down, that's a Norway spruce. So just by the shape of the architecture of the canopies, you often can identify the species.
Here it is, flopping in the wind. Nice.
This is the Keene Forest Park, and we got pictures of this totally cleared in agriculture 80 years ago. And you can see right here, there's a row of a whole bunch of trees there, and then a row of a whole bunch of trees here. And if you look on this side, you can see rows of trees also. So this is a Norway spruce plantation. Norway spruce tends to retain its lower branches. So somebody went in through here and pruned off all the lower branches so that you could go through it, I guess. But one of the problems with Norway spruce is that it retains its lower branches, so it's not that great of a timber species, whereas the native conifers tend to lose their lower branches, and they have nice straight trees with clean, clear wood growing over the top of the old knots where the branches were, so you get better lumber from native species than Norway, which is full of knots. A live branch will create a red knot, which is really tight, and that's good, but a dead branch creates a black knot that tends to fall out. It doesn't make good lumber. Norway spruce, and then right there, a whole bunch of Norway spruce. You can see the branches drooping down. And to the left of it is nice, big, tall, what? So the larch can get, tamarack can get quite big. And the bark looks a little shaggy, like shagbark hickory, but not even close. Those are attached to the twig, and the back side's got white strips in it, like hemlock, but they're very different, right? But no other species can you, just with the naked eye, see the white stomates that are in line. So Abies balsamea, balsam fir, a lot of folks use these as holiday trees, Christmas trees in the Northeast, as they do Fraser fir, Douglas fir. The Charlie Brown Christmas tree was a white pine for sure. Not a balsam fir.
Has a nice smell to it as well.
Yeah, indeed, it has a nice smell to it. It's got resin blisters on the inside the bark. In the springtime, they fill up. You can have pitch wars and pop them at each other. Nasty stuff that doesn't come out very easily. But that's fun if you grew up where balsam fir grew. Opposite branching pattern. I don't talk about that a lot with conifers, but it really helps us differentiate the balsam fir from the hemlock. The hemlock branches are more alternate. So there's balsam fir. Take a peek at it. There's some out here that I'll show others, but take a look at it and then we'll work our way out that way. I believe that's a white spruce right there. White spruce, like many spruces, have a really strong odor to them, and white spruce in particular smells really strong cat tea, in my opinion. But we can't see it up close. It's unfortunate, but that looks like a white spruce. So just to review from the back to the front, we've got white spruce, Picea glauca. We We didn't get to see the red spruce, Picea rubens, but the top is there. Norway spruce, Picea aves. In here is concolor fir, aves concolor. And then we got the cedars, which is the Juniper virginiana, the red cedar with the 2 needles, and then the Thuya occidentalis, the white cedar. We saw Douglas fir out there, Pseudotsuga menzii. We saw Larix larcinia and black spruce, Picea
Mariana.
Mariana. We saw red pine, Pinus resinosa, pitch pine, 3 strikes and you're out, Pinus rigida, that rigid bat, and Scotch pine, 2 needles, Pinus sylvestris, and then the first one we looked at was white pine, Pinus sylvestris.